The vacation that ruined everything. I'm an engineer who has always been socially awkward. If I was in school now, I would probably be diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. I decided that I have the money, so I might as well spend it on a 3 day cruise that left from Miami. The cruise was nice, and the cruise had events just for solo cruisers. After the cruise, I took a double-decker bus tour of Miami. The weather was extremely hot, which I think was the reason that there was no one else in line besides these two younger women who looked to be in their mid-20s. The three of us had 20 minutes before the next bus was scheduled to leave. The bus terminal was confusing because there were a bunch of the double-decker buses lined up with no sign indicating where the next bus would leave from. I can hear the two women in line speaking in what sounded like thick German accents. They both looked confused. The one woman looked at me and said, "The bus leave here?" I shook my head yes and replied, "That's what the person at the ticket booth told me." They both shook their head like they understood what I said. I said, "Where are you from?" The one girl replied, "Germany." I said, "Wow, is this the first time in the United States?" And they both responded yes. They told me their names were Mia and Emma. We continued our conversation, and I learned that they were visiting for another week, and they just came from Disney World. They told me they were next heading to New York City, which got me excited because that's where I was living. We all boarded the bus together, and there were no other tourists on the bus. I don't think I ever had better conversation with anyone else in my life. They were interested in my personal life and just America as a whole. I even invited them to stay in my NYC apartment, which they agreed and would save them a ton of money. I had never been so excited. We parted ways in Miami, and I met them at Newark Airport 2 days later. I took the week off of work. I showed them everything from Broadway to the Statue of Liberty. They seemed to have a blast. They even invited me to go to Germany and the surrounding countries. They said they would show me around. They told me they each had a young child that their mothers were watching and said they would bring their children with them when we toured Europe. I was fine with that. It was understood that I would pay for most of the trip and even watch the kids when they went out at night, which I was also fine with because being in my 40s, I didn't have the energy to go out at night. My job was flexible enough where they allowed me to take off another 2 weeks. It's December, and I knew the weather would be cold in Europe. I took a flight from Newark to Berlin. They had instructed me to then take a bus to Rangsdorf, Germany. They met me at the bus stop with each of them holding their babies. Their children were really bundled up because of the cold weather. I really didn't know much about kids, but they were younger than I expected. I couldn't figure out exactly what the women said, but maybe they were 3 months old. They both told me they knew each other growing up, and they both went to the same classes for unwed mothers. They told me that they wanted to take me to less touristy places, so instead of going to Prague, we went to Pilsen. We took a train from place to place. Their babies barely made a peep going to Pilsen. The women were mindful and took me to older, more run-down motels to help save money. Mia and Emma were exhausted, so they asked me to go to the local restaurant to bring back food. I didn't know the language, so Mia had me write down what she was saying. She was laughing the whole time because I kept misinterpreting what she was saying. With the note, I went to the restaurant and handed it to the woman behind the counter. She was really nice and eventually brought my food out. After eating, we looked around in Pilsen for a while and eventually retired back to the motel. I was really tired and their babies were already asleep. I passed out before Emma and Mia left to go out clubbing. I woke up the next morning and the 4 of them were in the motel. They asked me how their babies were when they left, and I kind of shrugged my shoulders and they both giggled. I had actually slept the whole night, and I had a hangover now. I really wasn't used to drinking and I was getting older, so that's probably why I felt like such crap. I was relieved their babies were okay. Our next stop was Ružomberok, Slovakia. We pretty much did the same thing where we stayed at a keeper motel. Both Mia and Emma insisted that I get takeout from a local restaurant again and bring it back to the motel so they can rest. I wrote down what Mia told me to write down. Mia was fluent in multiple languages, so she had no problem telling me what to write down for the order. Mia told me which restaurant to go to, and the woman at the restaurant, who I gave the note to, was very kind. I was just happy all of the places we had been to, including the trains, accepted my credit card. We ate at the motel, then we took a stroll around town. They had purchased wine, which we drank along a river. It was really one of the best times of my life. The babies were so quiet, but they were moving, so I figured everything was fine. Pretty much the same thing happened this night as the previous nights, where I passed out with the babies while Mia and Emma went out clubbing. They told me don't worry if the babies woke up because they had eaten already and would eventually fall back asleep. Morning came and we gathered everything and took a train to Oxe, Hungary. The train arrived and we made our way to the motel. Mia and Emma were tired, so Mia had me write a note to give to the person at the restaurant. They were joking because I was trying to pronounce the words Mia told me to write. I went to the small restaurant that Mia instructed me to go to, and I handed it to this very nice woman who didn't speak English. I brought the food back to the motel, and we ate. Then we brought wine and strolled around the town. It was cold, but the alcohol took away the coldness. The babies were well bundled up as they had been for the whole trip. The same thing happened this night as the previous nights, where I passed out with the babies while Mia and Emma went out clubbing.
The same thing happened the next morning, and we were now heading towards Deva, Romania. I was amazed that Emma and Mia were so well traveled. I wasn't good with women, but I almost felt that Mia was hitting on me. We made it to Deva and they led the way to the motel. I knew the routine by now, so I picked up the pen and paper from the motel, and Mia had me write down what to order from the restaurant. It was really hilarious and a really good bonding moment for us, with them laughing at me trying to pronounce the words she was telling me. The same thing happened as the previous days, where I brought the food back, and we ate, and then we went out. The babies were bundled up. Eventually, we made it back to the motel, where I passed out with the babies, and Mia and Emma went out. We all woke up the next morning. Emma was frantic because she told me she had called home last night and found out her mother was in an accident, and Emma and Mia said they had to cut the trip short. I agreed to give them cash to pay for their train fare back to Germany. I was disappointed, but I really did have a good time. Emma and Mia instructed me to take a train to Bucharest and then take a flight to Newark. I went to the Bucharest airport, and the next available flight was in 7 hours to Newark. I purchased the ticket and went through security. About an hour later, I had drifted off and was awakened by a large amount of police activity. As I awoke, I observed the police looking at a printout, then looking at me. Then about 20 of them rushed towards me. I felt like a quarterback about to be sacked. In real broken English, I could hear one of them say, "Your name?" After telling them my name, they manhandled me out of my chair and threw me on the floor. I couldn't make out a word they were saying, but it sounded very angry. They dragged me away to the police station. I waited there in a cold, dark cell for 4 hours. Eventually, they brought me out of the cell to what resembled to be an interrogation room. Then, a heavily accented, intimidating male who was easily over 6 feet in height said, "Where are they?" I said, "Who? Mia and Emma?" He responded, "Are they the children?" I said, "Mia and Emma's children?" His tone got more angry and he said, "Don't play fucking games with me. What did you do with the children?" I said, "Other than Mia and Emma's children, I have no idea what you're talking about." He then slammed his fist on the table and said, "You piece of shit. We have evidence you kidnapped and exploited 8 children." I said, "What?" He then took out the handwritten letters I wrote to the restaurants and said, "Is this your handwriting?" I said, "Yeah," but he replied, "We have these letters that you just admitted were written by you. The letters state that you will pick up the 2 children later at our agreed-upon location." I said, "What the fuck? Those letters were for meal orders." He cut me off and said, "I don't give a fuck what you call them. You're a sick, depraved man. Now all I'm concerned about is getting those kids back." I said, "You have to trust me. I met these 2 girls from Germany, Emma and Mia, in Miami, who later stayed at my apartment in NYC. I later agreed to meet them in Germany to tour Europe along with their 2 kids." He said, "Do you have proof of this?" I said, "Check their flight from Miami to NYC. I have their flight number." He said, "I'll notify the United States authorities, but listen here. If you're lying to me, you're going to pay 100 times over." They took me back to my cell, and I waited there in a cold, dark cell for 4 hours. Eventually, they brought me out of the cell to what resembled to be an interrogation room. Then a heavily accented, intimidating male who was easily over 6 feet in height said, "If you tell me where the kids are, and if they are unharmed, then at most you'll spend 5 years in prison. But if you make me go through all of the evidence we have against you, then you'll rot in the Romanian prison until you're hanged." I said, "Please, you have to believe me. I have nothing to do with this. I was just visiting Europe with Emma and Mia and their 2 kids. He said, "Very well. This is what we have. The FBI did a search of the people on the flight you gave us, and there was no one close to the description you gave us regarding an Emma or a Mia." I said, "I was duped. They probably took the train and paid cash." Then he said, "The FBI searched your computer and found evidence that you were in communication with a known kidnapping ring for years." I said, "I never did anything remotely even close to that. Those 2 girls planted that information on my computer." He then said, "We have your credit card statements that showed when you arrived in Berlin and the train ticket you purchased to Rangsdorf, Germany. Then we have the credit card statement and the confirmation of the hotel lobby clerk that only you had paid and checked in. Then we recovered pictures of the kids that were deleted from your phone. Then, as I told you the other day, we have the handwritten letters from you. We have the same evidence from Rusambrück, Slovakia, Ocha, Hungary, and Deva, Romania. The police from multiple countries interviewed every motel staff where you stayed at, and no one saw anybody but you." I said, "Did you check the cameras at the motels?" He said, "There were no cameras at the motel, and you knew that." I said, "Please, for the love of God, I'm the most boring person in the world. Up until I met those 2 girls, besides going to work, I just sat at home and played chess online. I've been completely duped. I thought those kids were Emma and Mia's." He replied, "Yeah, and they had different kids each day?" I said, "You have to understand me. The kids were bundled up most of the time. Whoever those 2 women were must have drugged them to keep them quiet, as well as they must have drugged me, which would explain why I was knocked out the majority of the evenings. While I was knocked out, they must have took those pictures of the kids on my phone, then deleted them. They must have sold those 2 kids and abducted 2 new ones each night. It's them. They had this all planned out for a long time. They must have had contacts in those restaurants that I handed the notes to. They must have pinned me as an easy mark from Miami or possibly before that." The cop replied, "We interviewed the staff at the restaurants, and besides you ordering food, they had no recall of being handed a letter." I responded, "Well, where did you get the letters from?" He said they were dropped when the last kid was kidnapped at the scene of the crime. Also, what was found at the crime scene was a note with your name on it. I said, you have to be kidding me. That's all staged. He replied, we have no evidence of those two women, just you. Now you'll rot in prison until you're hanged. They brought me to my cell, and I contacted a law firm. I spent every last penny I had and sold everything I had. My attorney law office was based in New York, but had partners in Europe. They told me it would take a while as they gather information and build up their defense. 3 months later, my attorney found the following information. The double-decker bus driver in Miami was interviewed, and he corroborated my story. They have video surveillance of me with the two women at the Statue of Liberty. They found two similar-looking women who were cruise line employees who probably staked you out and used the cruise line to get back to Europe. We assume they gave false identities to the cruise line, but we have their photos, which I'll show you in a minute. We were able to get multiple train conductors to say they saw you with two women and two young kids. One of the motel's nearby coffee shop picked up surveillance of you with the two women where they were seen holding the missing kids from Germany. Then he showed me the photos and I said, oh my God, that's them. He replied, we have other evidence as well and we are going to do everything to get you out of this prison. My court case received so much publicity that the kidnappers must have got scared and abandoned all 8 of the kids unscathed at bus stops and at train stations. It took a year for the Romanian authorities, along with the other countries, to agree to drop all the charges. I didn't receive restitution or anything for the time and money I lost, not even an apology, just a one-way ticket back to Newark. I now have nothing. I lost my job and all of my earthly possessions. I have to start all over. As far as Mia and Emma were concerned, they were never caught, and they probably weren't even from Germany to begin with.